New Thinking Aloud is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emmy Vadnais, co-host with Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is about a holistic doctor who expanded into spirituality. My guest is Jim Roach, who is a medical doctor who is double boarded in integrative medicine through the American Board of Integrative Medicine and the American Board of Integrative Holistic Medicine. He hosts and has presented at International Integrative Holistic Health Conferences. He is a published researcher and author of Brilliance, The Pursuit of Hope, Wisdom, and the Divine, Vital Strategies in Cancer, Hope, Healing, and Happiness in the Face of Cancer, and God's House Calls, Finding God Through My Patients. If you enjoy this program, please like, subscribe, press the bell icon, and share. Jim is located in Midway, Kentucky. Now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Jim. It's such a joy to have you with us on New Thinking Aloud today.
Thank you so much for your invitation. I'm thrilled to be on with you, and I love your shows. I've watched you for the last year regularly and appreciate the invitation.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you is because not only are you a physician, but you also expanded into holistic and integrative healthcare and even embraced spirituality. Can you share with us how you embarked on this journey and what led you from being a conventional medical doctor to holistic and into the spiritual realms?
After 20 years of conventional medicine, I took my family medicine boards and had extra time. I decided to read as many journals as I could. I decided I was focused on optimal wellness and optimal longevity. So I went to Andrew Weil's nutrition and health conferences around 2003, and then was intuitively attracted to a conference in New York City at Columbia University that Andrew Weil was doing there on botanicals. And I thought I never would use those in my practice. Why would I ever, go to New York City? It wasn't attractive at that time either. But my intuition said go, and I did. And I learned about an herb called rhodiola, which it proved to me that herbs are not placebo. That's something you see a response in 30 minutes when you take rhodiola. I gave to my son's third year of law school, and he got academic honors, for example, with rhodiola. In the Soviet Union, they did research with rhodiola with college students, giving it the week before exams and during exams. They scored one grade better than other students. So I then heard about Donnie Yance at a Medicine from the Earth conference in Black Mountain, North Carolina. He was head and shoulders above everyone else in his knowledge about botanicals and about cancer. He was having great success, and he was almost pleading, I've got these great ways to manage cancer. And so I went out to Ashland, Oregon, to study under him on 3 different occasions. So I became a consultant also for SpectraCell Labs. And so for 10 years, I've done consulting on vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and antioxidants. So I'm an expert now in botanicals. I'm probably the top botanical medicine expert as far as physicians are concerned in the country, and also as far as micronutrients. And we do comprehensive testing. So I became very successful in what I was doing. That translated in better success financially as well, because conventionally my practice was withering away, but with the new business model, it was flourishing. Then around 2011, I had a patient come who'd been in a car accident. She said she'd been out of body and she felt in ultimate bliss, and she didn't want to go back in body. She was mad about it, but she did come back in body. She was told it was not her time, and she was doing mission work after that. And I thought, what do you mean? You don't care if I save your life? I've worked all these years, studied all these years to save your life, and you don't care. And I thought, well, that actually would be kind of nice. And I thought, what if I could convince my patients they didn't need to worry about dying? And at that point, it was a preposterous thought, but it ended up being what I do now with that. So that started a pathway where I started inquiring of patients. I was mentioning this near-death study. I said, did anything like that ever happen to you? And at this point, I've acquired 96 reports of spiritual near-death experiences, and that led to my first book on that topic. And I've had 900 with transformative spiritual events, premonitions, intuitions, out-of-body experiences, voices, visions, dreams with meaning, seeing and sensing spirits. And guess what? They hadn't taught that in medical school. That was all new information. So that started me down the pathway. And then further down the pathway, I learned stories about UFOs and even about ETs. So that's how things have evolved. I did write a book on cancer in the late around 2018 because I had so much success and accrued so much knowledge. And I have a national clientele as far as cancer at this point. And then my most recent book expounded on kind of optimal mood, optimal mind, and then also divinity, optimal divinity. So that's been the pathway, Emmy, in terms of how I got there.
Why do you think more medical doctors don't go the pathway that you have gone?
Fear of malpractice. At this point, I work for God. Now, in medical school, they try to beat that idea out of you. I grew up in a Christian background. I always knew I was supposed to do good things. But, how is God possible? It's in medical school, they teach you not to trust anything you can't touch, see, hear, feel, and so, you come out of medical school thinking, well, God's impossible, but still you want to do good things for the world. But then around 2004, I went to a conference, the Academy for Integrative Health and Medicine, Dr. Robert Anderson, who founded that organization. And at that conference, they talked about energy medicine. And I got to walk with Dr. Anderson around the campus, and he told me some rather incredible metaphysical stories that just utterly changed my perspective. And from that point forward, I became open to the idea of quantum physics. And now that I feel like I have a great understanding, I said, well, of course there's a guide. At this point, I'm 100.00% certain. Well, my near-death patients have convinced me of that. The transformative spiritual events. For example, Ann Wood, she just passed over this past year. She was growing up, and her mother neglected her as a child, but a woman in the neighborhood took her under her wing. And several decades later, Ann woke up in the middle of the night after a vivid dream where this older mentor, this woman, was riding through her front yard on a choo-choo train, leaning out saying, toot, 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 toot. And she woke up and was compelled to look at the clock. It was 2:10 in the morning. And when she came downstairs, the phone rang, and she knew immediately that was her mother calling her to tell her that this woman had died. And so she picked up the phone and said, when did it happen? Rather than asking, did it happen? And it happened at exactly the same time, though it was a different time zone. So in relation to the time zone, it was the identical time with that. And then she went to visitation and told the greeter that story. The greeter held up 4 fingers and said, you're the 4th person with the identical story, right? So that kind of convinced me. It's not in your head, right? That is not possible for that to happen being in your head. And so that was kind of the final blow that got me 100% behind the idea that absolutely there's a creator out there.
Can you share a little bit about what Robert Anderson shared with you?
So the first story that impressed me was he and his wife slept on the 2nd floor of their house, and they woke up one night, and outside their window was a big ball, glowing ball of fire, or just a glowing ball. And they didn't know what that meant, but they knew it was important and unusual, and they needed to find out what it meant. So he went downstairs, and she checked on the kids. He found an ironing board with an iron on it that was turned on, and it was smoldering, and it was getting ready to break out in fire. So he immediately carried it outside. And then he came back upstairs, and his wife came back in the room, and the glowing ball had left at that point. but it was quite a big thing. The next morning, he went down and was talking with the neighbors and asked them, what did you think about that glowing ball? And they said, what glowing ball? What are you talking about? So that was a compelling story. A second story, he had a student that was shadowing him who traveled about 60 miles to get to his office. And one day the student had typed out, in the old days when you had to type, their term paper and put it on the back of the motorcycle and then rode to his office. When he got there, he found that there were just one or two out of the 50 pages left. And he was just crushed. And he said, I guess there's nothing to be done. And then Dr. Anderson said, well, maybe there is. And he went into the next room and just kind of meditated for a while. And he visualized where those papers had flown off, described the site to the student, who then, in fact, was able to go back and find that precise spot and found all but 2 or 3 pages by doing so. A third story, also even more impressive to me, was that his grandson was born at a hospital, I believe in San Francisco. And a day after the grandson was born, a new doctor showed up and evaluated the infant and found that it had bacterial meningitis, which it can be fatal, and if not fatal, can cause deafness or other disability at a major level. So this doctor, for the next few days, got him on appropriate treatment and was able to fix the problem and sent him home in a healthy way. And a week later, he went to the doctor's office for a checkup and he checked out fine. Then 6 weeks later, they went for a follow-up again. The office was in an office building. And when they got to the office, it was deserted. And they were really puzzled by that. So they asked the other tenants about that. And they pointed out, well, that's been deserted for a year or longer. And said, okay. He went back and checked the hospital records. That doctor was not listed on the staff. They went back and checked the California records. There's no doctor registered with that name in California. So it was Dr. Anderson's opinion that that was an angel that had come to diagnose that and save that child, which may have otherwise been maimed or died.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that caught my attention when you hear those stories.
You mentioned that many mainstream medical doctors may not expand into holistic health or embracing spirituality in their practices out of fear. And where are you now as far as some people might think, well, you can't just pray an illness away, or you really need to take some type of medicine, or that's just superstitious. So how do you kind of resolve some of those thoughts or beliefs?
Well, first of all, on the fear count, I've decided I work for God now. So as long as God's happy with what I'm doing, I don't care about the rest, because I recognize that if anything happens that's quote unquote negative, that ultimately it's going to be for the good. It'll be a lesson that I would learn that'll be helpful. So there's no reason to be fearful about anything, right? Our consciousness, our soul's going to survive for infinity once you grasp that. Now, I live in a small town of 1,500 people. Guess what? I have hardly any patients that come to me from Midway, right? You're not famous in your hometown with that. They come from Lexington, 12 miles away, or Louisville, 60 miles away. Or I had a patient in from Indiana, and I did a telehealth for someone in North Carolina today as well. So I really, it's the patients that want the type of care that I want. They're the ones that want to be responsible for the care. They want comprehensive testing. They want like food sensitivity testing, organic acid testing are two of the tests we particularly like to do. And they're willing to take the supplements that we suggest and to do the nutrition and the lifestyle changes to get their health better. And, word of mouth, after having a lot of success over the years, these patients, even before I say my first word, they believe that what I'm going to recommend is going to work. And so even that placebo effect may kick in to some extent. But I tell them just right off the bat about my spiritual near-death experiences and how the patients report the other realm is more real than this realm, and how they get mad about coming back and don't want to come back generally. And so when they hear that, they know where I'm coming from at that point. And then I have actually a spiritual checklist on my intake form. So I actually ask, have you had a near-death experience? I actually ask, have you had premonitions, intuitions, out-of-body experiences, voices, visions, and so forth? And so if they have a yes next to those, then I inquire about that further. So with the women, I go ahead and talk about the transformative spiritual events. Men aren't quite as intuitive, so I generally just mention about near-death experiences. But, I've learned, through quantum physics, if you take all the solid matter in our body and compress it as far as possible, that it's actually invisible, right? A University of Louisville physics professor mentioned that. And so we're essentially energy, we're essentially light waves, which is very powerful because every thought we have, we're generating waves. And if we're generating positive thoughts, that has an immediate healing effect on our bodies. If we're having negative thoughts, that has an immediate negative effect because those waves penetrate everywhere, right? We're so porous. And so they can help any organ or tissue to improve with that. So I explained that and emphasizing how important it is to stay in a positive frame of mind 24/7. So I then tell them, before you get out of bed in the morning, after you go to bed at night, tell God, the creator of the universe, exactly what it is that you want for your life, right? And be very explicit. And if you want to live a long life, you might envision your grandchild graduating from college, right? Envision exactly what that looks like. Because I explained, your thoughts create your reality. You can go from this second a zillion different directions. What is going to determine which of those zillion directions you go in? It's what you're thinking, right? And so each thought, it doesn't matter what you feel, okay? It's what you think, and it's what you then say and what you hear. That activates 3 different areas of your brain. And if you persist in that, you grow those neural pathways to maintain that positive frame of mind, and you help to create the reality you want. But that's the bottom line. And so, if you want to be healed from cancer, you need to, the number one thing is being in a peaceful place. They did research with mice where they implanted breast tumors, and they then stressed one group of the mice. The group that was stressed had a 30-fold increase in metastases. Now, when they gave the drug propranolol that blocks adrenaline, that prevented most of those metastases. So that's powerful. And so when they see an oncologist who puts the fear of God in them and say, you're going to be dead here in 3 months if you don't do the chemotherapy and so forth, then that's like putting a pin in the voodoo doll, right? That's the patients start believing that, and that's in fact what happens. So I tell them to put a filter in their ears, right, to filter that out. Remember that they're your consultant, but you're in charge of what you think and how you control. So we focus on peacefulness, and so getting spiritually grounded is crucial in that process. Lifestyle balance is important, getting a full night's sleep, getting rid of your adrenaline in healthy ways with physical activity as well. So all those are crucial, but there are also supplements. Chamomile tea is calming, relaxing. Trace mineral drops are important and helpful. L-theanine is a supplement I use a lot that's calming. So those are helpful both in tumor management and also in quality of life management. So really, and today, we've had 2 group prayers today, employing our staff with that. One was a cancer patient, a 23-year-old who had thyroid cancer, right? That's awfully young to be dealing with those issues. But we had a group prayer because I'd watched your report at New Thinking Aloud about Lynn McTaggart and the power of 8. And so in this group, we kind of set the intention initially, and I have them visualize exactly what it is that they want to be, in 20, 30, 40 years, or the vitality. So I have them set that intention and get in a calm, peaceful place. And then I have a prayer warrior on staff. She also works as a supplement manager, but she considers the prayer warrior job her primary thing. And so she will lead a prayer. And after the prayer, then I now ask the patient, who would you like to pray for, right? Because even Lynn McTaggart suggested that if you pray for others, that can be as powerful or maybe even more powerful when you do that. So I had them, so the patient today with thyroid cancer, prayed for his family. He had 3 family members there with him. And he said, they need to be relaxed. They need my support. So we prayed for that. And of course, the mirror effect associated with that, right? That bounces back. What Lynn McTaggart found was that the individuals who are doing the praying and intending benefit as much or more than the individual you're praying and intending for. So my staff it's probably the happiest staff in Central Kentucky, and they're getting more so all the time. And they really are enjoying being a part of this, part of the healing. And, if you understand quantum physics, this, I think, is the most powerful part about healing, is being able to get them in that positive frame of mind where they're sending positive messages and telling them to turn off the news. That's negative energy. That's impacting your health. Stay around people that are nurturing, cultivating, right? And avoid people that whine and complain and see the glass as half empty. So I tell them, if you have extended relatives that are negative energy, if you have others, use your family or other friends as advocates to keep those people out of your environment. We need you in a completely healing environment. And take the downside of that. Say you don't cure them of cancer, and say they die. Say they're in stage when they come. If they die in a month, guess what? They're dying in a peaceful place. They know what's going to be happening now, right? They know that their consciousness is eternal. So they're not worried. And I explained to the family, I explained, first of all, the patient, I said, the downside for you is ultimate bliss. That's the downside with this. But your family wants to keep you around. So really, I'm working for your family to keep you around, but you're going to be fine regardless. And when you take that approach, it's very powerful. And patients seem very happy with that. And our patients do really well. We double, triple life expectancies in our cancer patients. And that with chemotherapy, what we do makes chemotherapy and radiation and other strategies more effective. So we work really with the conventional doctors. We don't talk with them, but they do their thing. We do our thing in combination. We have a lot of success.
How much do you think thoughts, beliefs, intention impacts a person's health and wellness?
I think it's huge. And a simple example is if a patient goes to see a doctor with a cold, with respiratory infection, if the doctor is positive energy, regardless of what they recommend, the placebo effect improves the outcome with the patient. But guess what? If that doctor is negative energy, if he's in a bad mood and fumes and doesn't give good eye contact, that actually worsens the cold. So it'd be better if the patient hadn't gone at all, right? Because research has shown that they actually worsen with that. So the power of the doctor or the provider in these situations is very powerful.
And the person's own individual consciousness, how much of a role does that play in relationship to their health and wellness, juxtaposed to like medications or herbs or supplements or other treatments and interventions?
Well, it's my belief now, and this really is just in the past year, that really having a positive mindset and having spiritual grounding is the single most important thing. Again, remember the research with the mice and the metastases. If you can get that patient spiritually grounded where they have a knowing that they're going to be fine for infinity, right? It's even going to get better. After, living on Earth is a very tough existence, we've learned with that. So they're going to do well. They're going to be fine. And that's the most important thing. I did have an intuitive that I met, and I associate with a lot of intuitive individuals who kind of did muscle testing to kind of assess. And she, without muscle testing, assessed, how much do supplements help with this health situation? And how much does the spiritual grounding? And with her testing, she claimed that 80% of the benefits were from the spiritual grounding and only 20% from the supplements. I don't know how accurate that is, but that may well be right on target with that.
It could vary from person to person. You're talking about
Absolutely.
Muscle testing, muscle energy testing, or sometimes referred to as AK or applied kinesiology, where a practitioner will have a person, for example, hold their arm out and they'll press on it to test maybe a supplement or maybe spirituality or some type of intervention to see if the body goes strong with it, or if they become more weak.
Right, exactly. And a patient recently taught me the sway test, where you just hold it, you can pick up an apple in the grocery store and hold it in your hands. And do you lean forward or do you lean backwards? Leaning forward would be an affirmation. Leaning backwards would be, you can leave that apple there. And, some apples may be better than others, right? May depend on whether that apple is nurtured in a good orchard and not sprayed with pesticide. That apple might have a different impact.
What can you say to someone who may be listening thinking, oh, you have no idea how hard my life is and you want me to be positive? What have you found can be helpful for people who may be in the realm of what may be perceived as clinically depressed, but also just really finding life really challenging and a struggle?
Yeah. Well, first of all, with my understanding at this point is that life is about lessons, right? And our physical body is separate from our spiritual body. And that's particularly important, for example, in young females who have what I call the God gene mutation, where they don't metabolize adrenaline as readily and they don't metabolize estrogen. So they're estrogen dominant growing up. That attracts negative energy into their life. And when they experience negative energy, the adrenaline kicks in, and that's PTSD. And so I point out to them that in the religion I'm a part of, I grew up Christian, that forgiveness isn't an option. In order to be forgiven, we have to forgive, first of all, ourselves, but then also others, and not a level of, well, I forgive you, but you're still a jerk, but a level of grace where, well, if I grew up in your shoes, I might understand how this might happen. And it's amazing how many of my female patients tear up with that, because so many, in fact, most women in my practice are in that category. They're estrogen dominant, they're anxious, and they're fearful. And so forgiveness is huge. You've got to get rid of the yoke of unforgiveness for you to live in the present, not live in the past. And and you can do that with journaling. You can do that with positive energy. Women's groups would be other strategies, but it's crucial, because if you continue to have that rumination about things that happened negatively in your life, then you're never going to get over your anxiety completely. And maybe you can't get rid of anxiety altogether. That point will arrive, and that'll be at your death. You get to graduate when you solve that riddle about completely eliminating anxiety. And so if you realize everything is truly a lesson, you realize you're not your physical body. So anything can happen to your physical body. Anything can happen to that. But ultimately, that's not what matters. It's what happens to your spirit. And your spirit is always there, and it's always perfect. And you can just visualize it, in this heart chakra if you want to. So, the more severe the lesson, the greater the wisdom that is gained from that, right? You learn not to be vain. You learn that your body is not important. It's not important, how you look. It's important. What people care about is whether you're smiling, whether you're interested in them. And then they forget how you look and they forget about, what's happened in your life, right? So if that's the key, if you can realize that literally everything is a lesson, and then can learn from those lessons so you don't repeat them, right? Then that's really the wisdom that life produces for you. And life gets better and better. I'm 72 now, and, I wouldn't trade being 72 for 62 or 42 or 22. I'm so glad to have gotten the wisdom, even though my body is not quite as perfect as it once was.
How do you relate to or define spirituality?
Good question, because of course patients come in from all sorts of faith backgrounds or, no religious background at all, but yet often have a belief in a higher power with that. So, and, you take people where they are. You don't, I grew up Christian. I, have been a part of my church, though I've now found a new setting where I'm just meet with maybe 12 individuals. We read through some Christian scripture. We maybe do some Buddhist discussion as well. We do 5 minutes of meditation, 15 minutes of discussion. And these are smart, intellectual women. One of them was a director of MASH, for example. Was in Hollywood 20 years and directed women's documentaries in New York City for another 20 years. So I enjoy the setting. It's very stimulating for me. And I think that's really the future. I think churches that maintain their conventional approaches those are the ones that are shrinking and shriveling and will continue to do so because, we're in a new age. We're in a new time now. And I shouldn't have said new age. That brings up all these images. But this is a historic time. In my opinion, the greatest point of evolution of humans, because we're going into that awareness that our consciousness survives forever. And that's going to change so much. And we're gaining a consciousness about the universe, that it's not just humans here on Earth, right? The universe, 14 billion years old, the Milky Way, 12 billion years old. There are 400 billion stars in the Milky Way, 100 to 400 billion habitable planets in the Milky Way. There are 2 trillion galaxies like the Milky Way, and each with up to 1 trillion stars in it. Okay. So we're not the only ones out there. There are lots and lots and lots of others. Statistically, it's essentially impossible, as you can understand. And in fact, I've learned that there are things out there. And I have personal experience with that. So that's a paradigm shift when you have a knowing of the universe. And I'm comfortable, sharing that with my patients. Now, not all of them, right? Those that come from very rigid religious backgrounds, I'm more cautious. But I'm more open about my knowledge about the universe. And I explain exactly those statistics and go further and point out that the Earth and the sun are just 4 billion years old. So remember, the Milky Way, 12 billion years old. So we're about one of the youngest planets in the Milky Way, right? So these other entities have had a 1 to 5 billion year head start on us. So they're big brother looking out for us, right? They don't want us to explode in a nuclear holocaust, because remember, it's one big quantum bioenergetic field. We're all connected. That was what Einstein, for 120 years, quantum physics has been studying this, and we've learned this, that we're one big bioenergetic field. And a great example of that is mother's intuition, right? If their child's getting into trouble, it doesn't matter whether that child's on the next block or the other side of the world, that mom knows instantly, right? What's going on. Einstein describes spooky behavior at a distance. If you take a particle and split it in half and it goes opposite ends of the universe, any action on one half particle instantaneously acts on the other half particle, the other end of the universe. And a fellow won the Nobel Prize, 2022, with quantum entanglement, which that's the name for that, right? Jeffrey Mishlove pointed out that ever since the Big Bang, we all have been quantumly entangled, right? So we're all connected. Every thought we have impacts the whole universe, is what that means, right? And so the more and more people we can get thinking positively, the more and more we can get working together with like the power of a group of 8 and tending and getting the mirror benefits associated with that, then the faster the world is transforming, and it's really speeding along right now. And so it's not long, in my opinion, till we're going to experience, after we go through a period of chaos of maybe a year to 10 years, once we get the other side of that, it's going to be a very special place.
In fact, you sat next to Jeffrey Mishlove at the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and he shared with you that he had been wanting to explore reducing gun violence. And he asked if you had any suggestions, or you offered some suggestions.
He was just asking the group. He was announcing that. And I whispered in his ear, I said, well, I can ask the ETs that question. And he's wise enough that he didn't ignore that, or he didn't think that was a foolish thought. And he said, okay, do that. And so, for the last year and a half, I've been part of a group in Louisville called L&L/L Research. Now, the story behind them is really interesting. Back in 1949, there were 30 sightings of UFOs in Mayfield, Kentucky. And the call went out to Fort Knox to send out pilots to investigate. They sent up 3 pilots, and one of them, a 25-year-old, saw, in fact, a giant metallic UFO, followed it up to 20,000 feet, then lost oxygen, crashed, and died. Now, he had a 19-year-old understudy there who became very intrigued with the topic. For the next 25 years, traveled the country whenever there were UFO reports. And then his girlfriend was able to go into a trance and receive communications from extraterrestrials. The so-called raw contact was the main contact at that point. And so they began recording those communications. A third individual, the woman was Carla, the man was Don Elkins, and they had Jim McCarty did the recording. Those are the three originals. Don became a physics professor at the University of Louisville, and later was a pilot with that. And those first two have deceased, but then Jim McCarty is still around. And around 43 years ago, they connected with Qu'o. Qu'o is what we would call a sixth density social memory complex, and he combines with the fifth density and fourth density social memory complex, so the communication comes through more clearly. So you can think of that as maybe in a non-physical domain, all the brains on a particular planet are able to amalgamate into a single voice and communicate in that regard. And so for the last, 43 years, we've been communicating with Qu'o, this combination, and the 20 years before that with Ra and maybe Lotwe as another one. But we have 40 years of documentation with Qu'o. There on this website, you can read all these communications, and there have been books written that have now been translated into 24 languages. Okay. So the whole world is aware of this to some extent now. And so it's not anything all that novel. It's just not gotten much publicity associated with it. So I started attending this group about a year and a half ago, and immediately, and I've taken a Baptist minister there. I've taken the matriarch of Frankfort, Kentucky, the capital there. I've taken about 6 individuals. None of them have a wisp of doubt that we are in fact communicating with ETs from a higher dimension. They have a lot of wisdom in what they share, but also they're very cautious with what they share. They can't interfere with free will, but they can tell you, for example, with meditation, that styles of meditation that are more effective. I asked the question, for example, what's the root psychological cause of cancer? The answer was anger with that. And I asked the question, well, what's the multiplier effect? If you have 2 people praying or intending, 3 people, 4 people, is there a multiplier effect? And the answer was it doubles for each person you add. So from their perspective, if you have 3 people, you have 4 times the impact. If you have 4 people, that's 8 times the impact. So I try to utilize larger groups, like a group of 8, because that's all we can fit in a room just about as well. But to get on to Jeffrey, he asked about that. So I asked the ETs, Jeffrey wants you to take care of the gun violence problem for us. And the ETs don't see things quite that way. But they did suggest, what you can do is a form of meditation where you visualize those individuals, maybe a cylinder of light around them, kind of protecting them from acting out violence to themselves or others. And said if you do that meditation regularly, and if you do that, with larger groups of individuals, that yes, that has an impact and can make a difference with that.
Well, and from that, we created the Tonglen meditation. I'll link to that in the upper right corner of the screen, where in the Tonglen meditation, you actually bring the suffering of others into you and you transmute it with your love and compassion. But since we're all interconnected, it isn't that you're really bringing that pain in and it's going to stay with you necessarily, but it's already there within all of us. But it's a way of focusing on it so that we can all help each other and be in more harmony with each other. So thank you, Jim, for that consultation. I have found it to be a very, very healing meditation for myself as well when I do it.
Right, exactly. That mirror effect. And so once the world wakes up to this idea that, if you pray and intend for someone else, that you get as much or more benefit from it, then obviously you're going to be praying and intending a lot, right, to optimize the benefits that are offered. I remember hearing an Asian gentleman saying, pray like your hair's on fire, right? And so if we took that to heart and did that, we could transform the world rather rapidly. And I think that's what's in fact going to happen. That realization is going to arrive when we get to that tipping point of 51% of the world thinking in those terms. I think we're going to have a whole new world under our feet, and that's special. I do want to get back to, you mentioned about depression. I don't want to shortcut that topic, you do really want to be comprehensive with depression. There's so many factors that play a role. Your nutrition is huge with that, right? I tell my patients, whenever you want to be depressed, just eat sugar, eat processed foods, eat gluten. Guess what? You'll be depressed from eating those foods. But when you're talking to men, you have to frame it in a different way. You have to frame everything as far as testosterone. So I tell men, whenever you want to increase your female hormone, the estrogen, eat sugar, eat processed foods, eat gluten, and you'll have your wish, right? Whenever you want more testosterone, take your vitamin D. And when you want more estrogen, skip your vitamin D. Research with fish oil showed that increased semen volume and size of the testicles. So days you want your testicles to shrink, skip your fish oil. Days you want your testicles to grow, take your fish oil. If they get too big, let me know. But no men have complained about that so far. So in speaking with men, that works really well. And women are much more complicated because of the menstrual cycles. And I point out, women will come in with 25, 30, 35 symptoms. But I point out to them, every one of those symptoms is better the week after your period. Almost every one of those symptoms is worse the week before your period. So guess what? Hormones play a huge role with all of those symptoms. And by modulating hormones, because 80% of us at least have too much estrogen now and not enough free available testosterone. Because again, when you eat processed foods, you're raising your estrogen. When you gain weight in your fat cells, you convert testosterone to estrogen. BPA in plastic water bottles acts like estrogen in the body. In fact, every chemical, preservative, you go to the grocery and you have ingredients, those preservatives ingredients are metabolized by the liver where you metabolize estrogen, right? So those interfere with estrogen metabolism. So all those chemicals raise your estrogen levels. So when you want to lower estrogen, then eat whole foods. When you want to raise your estrogen and be more anxious, panicky, obsessive, because, right, those are the symptoms that are associated with estrogen dominance, right? Anxiety, panic, obsessiveness, being a detailed person. My employees are in that category because they cross the T's, dot the I's, they're workaholic, very loyal with regards to that. But phobias, sleep disturbance, irritability, carbohydrate cravings, swelling, breast arms, tenderness, migraines, every periods, cramping, bloating, brain fog, aches and pains in joints and muscles. All of those symptoms correlate with higher estrogen. So you get the estrogen down through nutrition, through physical activity, right? Because you get more physically fit with physical activity, getting to sleep on time because if you don't get enough sleep, that's going to alter your hormones as well. And again, supplements like vitamin D and fish oil and turmeric are vital for helping to get the hormones balanced. Eating cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cabbage, kale, onions, and garlic also are helpful in that regard. So balancing hormones is huge. But the other big aspect is nutrition, digestion, and the intestinal health. And in the nutrition category, going to the grocery on a full stomach, shopping the perimeter, getting organic foods whenever possible, and then saying a prayer before your meal helps switch into parasympathetic digestive mode, chewing your food until it's a liquid, and then supporting digestion with bitters. That can be apple cider vinegar, that can be black cumin seed oil, that can be ginger, and then digestive enzymes help. The key is we got to break down those food proteins into harmless amino acids. Now, 95% of us are sensitive to cow milk products, and most of us are sensitive to gluten, and maybe 80% to eggs. So starting out, you want to be avoiding those foods. Anytime you eat those, you're generating inflammation, which translates into leaky gut, which leads to more toxins, and those toxins contribute to disease. So all of that's important. So probiotic, along with the others, are all helpful. So all that affects your mood, affects your level of anxiety, etc.
Yeah. Thank you for all of those tips. I know probably about 10 years ago or more, my mother had a heart attack, and I tried to talk with the cardiologist about her being on a statin after she had her stent placed. And I was trying to present about how I had learned that inflammation can maybe even cause cardiovascular disease. So some of the foods that you were mentioning that can cause a person to be unwell and have more anxiety, low mood, depression, as you mentioned, also can cause inflammation.
Absolutely. Because these, for example, when you get an antibiotic, or if you eat out and it's not organic, or if you're eating foods that are not organic, you're getting Roundup, and Roundup acts like an antibiotic in the body, killing off the lactobacilli And of course, antibiotics deplete your microbiome, and you need those bacteria to maintain the strength and integrity of your intestinal wall. So without those there, you get increased intestinal permeability, also called leaky gut. And so with that leaky gut, the food proteins, before they're fully broken down into harmless amino acids, are able to cross in the bloodstream. The immune system sees that, thinks it's being invaded, sends out antibodies to attack those food proteins. So it's attacking your intestinal lining, and it's attacking anywhere in your body that it sees those food proteins or anything that even looks like those food proteins. That's autoimmune issues, basically, with that, right? And once you develop that leaky gut issue, then think of the bacteria in the intestinal tract. They eat food and they excrete toxins, right? And normally those go out the bottom, but with increased permeability, those toxins get absorbed in the bloodstream. They're lipophilic, meaning they're attracted to fatty tissues. The brain's the fattiest tissue. The breasts are fatty tissues. The nerve sheaths are fatty. So that's where those toxins hang out. And then it's your ability to get those toxins back out of your body that determines how bad your symptoms are. For example, if you have healthy detoxification pathways, a child will do well. But if you have severe impairment with detoxification, then you end up with autism, right? Too much inflammation. All those kids have severe food sensitivity issues and therefore overloaded with toxins and excess inflammation, and they can't get those toxins out. For example, PON1 is a gene mutation that almost all autistic kids have. And guess what that metabolizes? Roundup. So if you look at the incidence of autism and Roundup use, that overlaps. Now, that's not the only cause by any means of autism, but that certainly is a major contributing factor, and that's contributing to the increase in autoimmune disorders that we're experiencing. And 1/3 of kids now have mental health issues, and it's my belief that the whole world, that the IQ level is dropping across the board due to inflammation, due to toxins. So in my last book, I wrote about strategies. First of all, how to avoid prescription medicines, but also, nutrition, lifestyle, but supplements. That's my expertise, or the botanicals and the other nutrients to help because there may be 40 different nutrients that promote brain growth. We used to think you couldn't grow the brain, right? But you can grow the brain. Vitamin D grows the brain. Fish oil grows the brain. Turmeric grows the brain by 2 mechanisms. Lion's mane grows the brain by 2 mechanisms. Right? So the more of these you get on board, even if parts of your brain are shrinking, you can be stimulating brain growth and maintain, a quality brain throughout your life. Cholesterol is important for the brain. It's 70% fat, 53% cholesterol, and hormones are made out of cholesterol, right? So when you lower cholesterol, 100% of the time, you're lowering hormones. And so hormones are anabolic, building and strengthening. And so lowering hormones is catabolic, shrinking, shriveling. So it's my belief that when you take a statin, that you're shrinking, shriveling every organ and tissue in your body. If you look at the side effects of statins, that's consistent with that. Also, CoQ10, that you're familiar with, is made by the HMG-CoA reductase pathway. So 100% of the time you're depleting CoQ10, and that's important for mitochondrial function for every cell in your body. So your body, every cell is depleted by 2 mechanisms. So that leaves a whole host of other issues.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Going back to how we are all interconnected with consciousness, there might be someone or several people listening thinking, well, if everything's infinite and as Jim is suggesting, it's just going to get better, why even try in this life? How about just let it all go? And, you've shared about near-death experiences, and those are frequently pleasant. So maybe it's not so bad just to not even try.
Yeah. Good question. I'm glad you answered it. Now I'm going to make a point about my previous thing, because I don't want patients to stop statin cholesterol medicines just because of that idea. You always check in with your healthcare provider. One of the things I do like to substitute is turmeric. Research has suggested that turmeric is as effective as simvastatin for cholesterol. So there are other strategies, other ways to protect your arteries. So don't stop your statin just because I mentioned that, but do research and look at doctors that are open to other strategies with that. So getting to your question, Emmy, about that, right, why doesn't everybody just commit suicide to achieve ultimate bliss, right? Well, there's a little bit more to it that's important. Right? Half the world believes in this thing called reincarnation, right? And where did they come up with that idea? Well, it turns out, of course, as you know, the University of Virginia School of Medicine Division of Perceptual Studies for the last 60 years has been studying reincarnation, right? And so they've had over 2,500 children that have come to them saying that they were reincarnated from previous individuals, particularly after a tragic incident or if an individual died earlier in life. And with, like 1,700 of those cases, they have good, strong evidence. Some of those cases are essentially bulletproof with that. So University of Virginia has essentially proven reincarnation, but also a famous Kentuckian that's important to know about, Edgar Casey, right? So people think of Kentucky with Kentucky Fried Chicken, but I want them to think about Edgar Casey because he died in 1945, but he was a strong Christian. He read the Bible over 65 times and taught Sunday school. But he found out when he went into a trance that he could evoke cures for individuals. All he needed was a name and address, and they needed to be at home. If they were out, he couldn't do it if they weren't in their house where they said they were going to be. So he did over 14,000 readings. He consulted with Harry Truman, with Woodrow Wilson, with Thomas Edison, with Nikola Tesla, right? So he was highly regarded in a lot of ways back then. But one of the things that happened when he went into his trance was he started talking about past life history of individuals going way back. And so that planted the seed for reincarnation with me when I was young, reading about Edgar Casey. And then that rhymes with, half the world believing in that, and then what the University of Virginia research, but then also the extraterrestrials are, on the same page with all of this. So reincarnation is part of the picture from my perspective. And there's this thing that they point out that sometimes you need to reincarnate to learn the lessons that you didn't learn this lifetime, right? So you want to learn the lessons in this lifetime so that you don't have to reincarnate into a third density again, right? And I've been told that I'm going to be going into a higher density next time, so I'm not worried about myself at this point. But, you can think of the world in two versions. There's the service to self people and the service to others. And if you're in the service to others category particularly, and if you're doing good things and you gain awareness of the big picture, you don't have to worry about reincarnating in third density again. But, if you have to reincarnate, you're going to have to learn all these lessons all over again. And life on Earth, the other ETs, this is maybe the toughest place in the universe, right, to incarnate because of all the challenges here. And so maybe you don't want to have to go through that. That was one answer to your question.
You mentioned that you are Christian, you were raised Christian, and at the same time you talk about extraterrestrials. And you are convinced that the information that you receive is valid and accurate. So how do you sort of marry those ways of viewing reality, spirituality, metaphysics, and how do you know that this is accurate information that you receive?
Right. So wonderful question for sure. And so for 71 years, I attended the same church, Disciples of Christ, here in Midway. My ancestors going back to 1840 when this church was founded attended Midway Christian Church. So we have a long ancestral heritage there. And my mother, a strong Christian. We had Head Start in the basement of our house because they couldn't find any other place to have Head Start, for example. So I grew up in that atmosphere knowing that I was supposed to be doing good things in the world. But with my church, they weren't understanding about the possibility of UFOs and the possibility of ETs. And even though they came on board with the near-death experiences and transformative spiritual events, but metaphysics beyond that, they don't have a handle on. And so I actually asked the minister, would it be okay if I give a sermon on quantum physics? Well, you can guess how that went down. And the answer was no, but you can have these Sunday school sessions if you want to. And we're a relatively small church these days, 30 individuals. And so I knew there might be 3 or so that would show up for a Sunday school session. So, when you're given a lemon, make lemonade, right? So at first I rejected the idea, but a few weeks later I thought about it and said, okay, let's do this. So I've put full page color ads in the Lexington Herald Leader. The Lexington, Kentucky is about 500,000 people. All right. And I put those in 2 consecutive days about Sunday morning sessions that I was having, teaching quantum physics and teaching about reincarnation, about dream work, Edgar Cayce, and about UFOs, right? And so I had 80 individuals show up at the first session. The next week, it was 1 degree here in Midway. We had 50 people show up with 1 degree temperature. We're not used to those temperatures here like you are in Minnesota. So we've had a big group, and the last time it was back up to nearly 80. And our final session this coming Sunday will be focused primarily on extraterrestrials. So this is my way to educate my church about this. And Emmy, I think you'll love this challenge I made. So I took the most respected elder in the church, and the minister was at this first quantum physics meeting, and I said, is this guy sane? Is he does he have psychiatric issues? Is he schizophrenic or bipolar? And she said no. And I said, is he one of the smartest guys? Yes. Most technical guy? Yes. So, if he says it, then he's believable, right? And I said, I'm going to take him with me when I go up the next time to speak with the ETs. And Dick, would you promise to tell this group, would you be utterly frank and tell them whether you think this is real or whether I'm a fraud, right? And so Dick is game for that. His curiosity has been raised by this. So this coming Saturday, guess what? Dick is going up with me, and he's going to sit in like the Baptist minister did and like the others have done, and then come back and report to the church. So when Dick speaks at this next session, I think the church is going to listen. And I think the other audience members are going to listen. And I think that then will validate and stretch their minds. So the information that comes through, the reason it is very apparent that it's extraterrestrial is because of the quality of the information and the way it's presented. I don't know of anyone on Earth that has the intellectual abilities and knowledge to present fluently this type of information, sentence after sentence after sentence after sentence after sentence. I mean, Qu'o goes into a lot of detail. So there's no hesitation anywhere. There's no pauses or anything. If a human is doing that, they'd have to gather their thoughts in between sentences to some extent. It doesn't flow in because you're asking questions on the spot, right? Qu'o, now that said, we have a round robin at the start of this session, and you feel your brain being kind of x-rayed by Qu'o. So Qu'o does know what you're thinking before you get started. And then the channelers go off in the room to kind of get tuned. And then we play a song to kind of set the mood. And then we say the Lord's Prayer, all right? Because when you're communicating to some entity outside of Earth, it always needs to be in Christ consciousness, right? Because there's a lot of, the way the University of Louisville physics professor explained it was, it's like turning a radio dial. You can get all kinds of noise. And just because there are entities on the other end that maybe once here and deceased doesn't mean their IQ is any higher, right? So that doesn't mean the information is going to be valid. But once you get a good source, it's finally appeared 20 years after starting with raw contact, the Qu'o contact came through, and that has been transformative. And the recognition, Qu'o is so loving and caring and compassionate in the communications. And Qu'o says, if anything doesn't resonate, discard that, right? You don't have to believe everything. And honestly, Qu'o doesn't know everything, right? Qu'o's sixth density, but seventh density knows more than sixth density, and eighth density knows more than seventh. And you climb these ladders until you reemerge to the source ultimately. And that's kind of the goal with this. So that's the best way I can kind of explain the validity of that. And these are just ordinary people that are doing the channeling. These are middle-income individuals. In fact, Jim, who survived, is like an 81-year-old hippie, right? So he's not an intellectual giant by any means, and these other individuals aren't. But the information that comes through, intellectual giant information.
How do you differentiate Qu'o from maybe an angel or God, him or herself?
Qu'o makes the differentiation partly by saying Qu'o's of service to the creator, right? And is of service to the source with that. So Qu'o, in fact, identifies in that regard. But, there are a lot of energy densities out there, and they can appear, because it's a higher vibration and our senses are so limited, right? We just sense a very small amount of the spectrum of energy out there. And as we know, animals have a lot higher level of sensitivity in terms of smell, in terms of hearing and so forth. But, we can't tell when radio waves are transmitted through our bodies. We can't tell when TV waves are transmitted through the bodies. We actually sense a very small amount of the energy out there. And, vibration is key. As you know, furniture is low vibration, and then depressed, anxious people, angry people have low relative vibration compared to individuals that are happy or that are living their spiritual mission. They have a higher vibration, and the goal is to gain a higher and higher vibration, because as you do, you gain a greater consciousness for one, and you get additional like psychokinetic properties, for example, which helps you understand the universe more effectively. A table can't cause a spoon to bend, right? But we can. You can take classes now, and not that everyone will learn how to do that, but you can learn in classes how to bend a spoon. That's psychokinesis at our level. But imagine going at a higher level of vibration, a higher level of consciousness, and get up to the level of the creator. Then guess what? The creator, through intention can create. And in fact, that's the best way for me to understand how the universe was created, was simply through intention, right? Our thoughts create reality, and that's true. So we can bend spoons, but imagine at those higher vibrations, the ability to create with their levels of consciousness and understanding. So that's how I understand, the development of the universe and how God or the creator or the source is able to create. But, there are entities on the other side, higher level vibrational densities that can appear and accompany us, angelic, if you wish, with regards to that, or they can be perceived in other ways. But yes, we can, it's my belief we have these presences with us at all times, kind of helping to guide. And I know, Emmy, I catch myself at times as I'm speaking to patients, and even I probably could do that today. As I'm speaking, I'm thinking to myself, where are those words coming from, right? I hear them, but where are those words coming from, right? It's an odd feeling. So I feel like I must be channeling at times. I think that information is coming through. And I've met a lot of patients and other individuals that clearly are channeling information. I've met a songwriter who he'll be leaning back in his chair and the whole song will download all at one time. Now, he still has to come up with the lyrics, and that can take him a few days, but the whole song intact will channel down all at one time. I've met great sculptors who everything channels down and they can do their sculpture. And in so many avenues, I think with so many inventions that we've had, that information, in my opinion, was primarily channeled, most likely.
In your time of being we'll say a conventional mainstream medical doctor, moving into holistic health and integrative health, and embracing spirituality more, how has your gifts of intuition, psychic abilities, and spirituality grown or expanded for you?
I do feel like I've developed intuitive skills. I do feel like I can read patients much more quickly than I used to. I can tell individuals within, 15, 20, 30 seconds, whether there's someone that likely has a spiritual story, because they tend to have a glow about them. They have a serene appearance. They often have detailed notes, right? They're kind of obsessive compulsive. They may be dressed perfectly. I don't know anyone who dresses perfectly around here. It looks perfectly, but you look pretty close to that today. So I think you're in this category, right? So those are the ones that I've learned are intuitive and have had these spiritual experiences. And your intuitive abilities increase, when you work on that over time. So as I've heard more of these stories and gained an understanding with that, I feel like my recognition of special things has grown with that. So, for example, a few years ago, I had a dream where I was in church at my church pew in second pew, and I was the only one there. And then a bubble descended from the ceiling and then filled the entire visual field. And my grandmother's face with her gentle smile filled the whole visual field. And when that happened, I felt a physical warmth. And she was there smiling for about 10 seconds and then ascended and went to the ceiling and turned into a moth. And as it rose, that physical warmth dissipated. So that was the mark that this was real. I'd never had a physical warmth with a dream. Never since then have I had a physical warmth with a dream. But that way I knew that, yes, this was my deceased grandmother sending an affirmation. And I think the affirmation was, she had bipolar disorder. She had electroconvulsive treatments. And she was happy that I treat bipolar disorder with high-dose fish oil and high-dose natural lithium. And that will take care in patients that are compliant. And we use more things in addition with that. But I have maybe 80 to 90% success with doing that. So I think that was affirmation that my patients don't have to go through the ECT treatments that she had to suffer through. And I started doing dream work this summer. And, Edgar Casey encourages all of us to do dream work. He says important information comes through, a vital amount of information, and it's multi-layered information. So you write down those dreams as soon as you wake up and study them and try to understand each layer of the dream. So I started with that work this summer, and just a few weeks later, I had a vision of a factory floor from a 45-degree angle, and it had like 1,000 individuals. They looked like they were in one-piece yellow suits, all right? And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that was really important because it's a very vivid dream. I told my wife that story, and my daughter, who doesn't even live with us, I told that story to her as well. And 1 week later, a picture was taken at Austin, Texas, of the first Cybertruck that was produced. And it was that same 45-degree angle looking down with nearly 1,000 workers, all with yellow vests on. And in the middle was the first Cybertruck. And why that was important to me is that, Tesla is almost my entire retirement, right? So that Cybertruck is maybe the most important vehicle right now. And so my retirement is tied in. So this is a very important topic to me. And then a week after that picture was taken, that showed up in the second quarter report online, which I was reading, and bingo, I saw that picture. Like, whoa! I'd had to dream this exact picture a week before the picture was taken, and then reappeared in this second quarter report, which most people wouldn't have seen, but since I have Tesla stock, I saw that, right? And that proved to me, what I'd been reading about precognitive dreams. And that helps support the idea that all time is now, right? That the past and the future are all right now when you're able to see the future in that way. And then we know that all time is condensed, all space is condensed. So that helps support that idea. So those are some of the factors. I was telling you a story right before we came on about how I woke up one morning and had the sense of a friend, Will Brown, that he needed to be on CoQ10. And I don't know Will that well, but I was compelled. A year previous to this, I never would have followed up on that. But I said, I'm going to trust my intuition this time. So I contacted Will and told him that I had the intuition he needed to be on CoQ10. Well, it turned out he was on red yeast extract, which has statin cholesterol medicine in it. And statins, as I mentioned earlier, lowers CoQ10 levels. So yes, he needed to be on CoQ10. He started it and felt better being on CoQ10. So that was one of the first times that I really followed through with an intuitive insight and to check it out. Now, you're not going to get 100% success with that, but I think Jeffrey points out that maybe 70% of the time you will have success when you follow through on those intuitions.
You mentioned psychokinesis, and you also have an ability with lights.
So, and I was reading in the book that even Alexander had this experience as well, that even He's the Harvard neurosurgeon who wrote the book Proof of Heaven, who had that profound spiritual near-death experience. So I was reading in this book and read about that, and I said, that happened to me, right? Because when my wife and I would walk through town for years and years, and we don't do that currently, but for many years, when you walk under a street light, it's 50-50 whether it's going to turn on or turn off, right? It's just purely random. Except when I walk under it, 85% of the time it would turn off, and then 15% of the time it would turn on. And with the creator's sense of humor, when it turned off, I discovered that was affirmation, that what I did that day were good things. And when it turned on, it was an indication, well, you need to do things a little bit differently next time, right? So it was nice to get those affirmations and that insight. But yes, that happened year after year with that. So a very special experience.
Near-death experiences provide us a lot of information and validation about what can or may happen when we die. You being a physician, you've mentioned you've had many patients have near-death experiences. Can you share a couple of those?
So I will mention two if we have time. First, Qu'o, who was a young Afro-American at 18 years of age, had the choice of going to Vietnam, or if he volunteered, he could go to Okinawa. So we know which direction he went. In Okinawa, he was driving a Jeep rather recklessly, and he nearly went over a 70-foot cliff, which would have killed him. But instead, he ran into a building and went into a spiritual near-death state where he had knowing of the divine and all-knowing. And he came out of that wanting to learn as much as he could about all the religions. So he traveled the world for the next 10 years. He went to India and had telepathic communications with the yogis in India. And then after 10 years, though, he began to doubt, and he said, God proved to me the reality of you. Now be careful about what you ask with that. So a car crossed 4 lanes of traffic and T-boned him, ripped half his nose off. He had so many fractures in his face, it took several pages of radiology report to describe all those fractures. And he once again descended into spiritual near-death state. This time he felt like he was sitting in a chair naked in the middle of New York City. He couldn't get under it, couldn't get around it, right? And then he perceived himself, in the dark, flowing down a river, and on the bank were several individuals who he intuited were his ancestors. And then it gradually got light. He felt in the presence of the Almighty, who he did share, even though he's a shaman now, now he's deceased, but he shared that was the presence of Jesus at that time. And as it got light, he once again had the all-knowing sense, and he never questioned the reality of God after that. I think he learned that lesson. So that was a particularly powerful one. But another one I think is important for me to share as well. I was planning to have a conference, and I just decided a month previously about that. And so I'd only had a couple of people sign up, and I was planning to have it just a month hence. So there was some concern, with how many people are going to come? Would we have 3, 4, 5? I think we ended up with 5. But there was that somewhat of a question, should I go forward with this conference? I had a new patient show up at my office. She lived in Colorado with her husband, and she had a vision of a college on the hill in the word Ashland. And she didn't know what this riddle meant, but she had had 3 spiritual near-death experiences herself. So the more of those you have, the more intuitive you are. So she knew she had to solve that riddle. It caused her to go to Ashland, Oregon to try to find answers, but she didn't find answers. She and her husband moved to Central Kentucky. She came to see me as a new patient. And as she left, there was a college on the hill just outside of Midway. She did a YouTube search of me or another searching and found me giving a testimonial for Madiri Foundation in Ashland, Oregon. And so she came to the front desk a month later. My wife was receptionist and said, I need to see Dr. Roach. My wife explained, well, he's booked out 3 or 4 months. And she said, no, you don't understand. I need to see him today. So my wife knew to work her in. And as I walked in the room, she said, you're probably going to think I'm crazy. But she took my index finger, middle finger, then the fourth, and then back to the middle finger and said, And by the way, with this conference, I hadn't told anybody where it was going to be. I hadn't even told my wife where it was going to be. But this woman said that conference at Midway College next month is supposed to happen. And that's the message I'm supposed to deliver to you. And it's a very powerful message because it caused me to go to Ashland, Oregon to try to solve the mystery. It caused my husband and I to move to Central Kentucky and then to come see you as a patient to give you this message. So whoever is behind this is very powerful. So that was back in 2014. I had my first conference, and now I've had 11, 12 conferences. So until I get a message to stop having those conferences, those will continue. And they've been successful. They're not large groups intentionally, but I've had, health practitioners from Seattle, a lot from Seattle, from Canada. I had a doctor from London, England fly over. And I think they're gaining momentum now and growing again. So that's part of my spiritual mission, really, is to educate practitioners on these much healthier approaches to solving healthcare problems.
What advice would you give to a newer medical doctor, nurse practitioner, or really any healthcare professional?
The key thing is to gain a knowing of quantum physics and to gain a knowing of your spiritual pathway, why you're here on this earth. And like with my young, adolescents, what I advise them to do is write from 1 to 100 everything you want to achieve in your life and distill that down into your life vision. And advice that Seneca gave to Caesar, he asked the question, is life too short? And he answered his own question saying, no, it's not too short. It's that we waste too much time. So once you get your life vision, spend 100% of your energy towards achieving that vision. There are a lot of things you can be doing, but if they're not on your pathway, you don't want to be doing those. So watching TV, watching a sports event may not be consistent with your spiritual pathway intention. And, you don't find happiness by, getting a new car, by a big house, a wife that's gorgeous. Those temporarily bring happiness, but happiness comes from developing who you are on the inside, becoming an expert in what you love to do that keeps a roof over your health, right? So follow your heart and do what you love to do. And sometimes you have to do jobs to make ends meet, but continually work to where you're doing what you love to do. And that's your spiritual pathway. And if you are expert, you will always have income to support you, to take care of yourself. And people seek out experts. And so, that's very fulfilling for you. And then these other things come into play. If you've got your mission intact and you've got good financial support, then guess what? That'll attract in a nice car, a nice house, a nice wife, and bring in everything else. But that's not where happiness occurs, though. It's that self-satisfaction where you really are connecting in with your spiritual mission on earth. There's a reason we're here on this earth. It's not just random. We're here for a purpose. And so paying attention. What is it that makes us flow is the way, the title of the book, right? Where you lose track of time doing what you love to do. If it's helping the world get better and keeping a roof over your head, that's what your spiritual mission is. And so the healthcare practitioners need to find their spiritual mission, number one, and then gain a knowledge of quantum physics and understanding that there is a creator and therefore, it doesn't matter what the doctor next door thinks about what you're doing, right? If you're if you're following your spiritual pathway, working for the creation, that's all that matters. And anything that happens, if you get sued, that's ultimately going to be for the good because good things are going to come from that. So I'll knock on wood here with that because fortunately, that's not been an issue so far in my life. Because when people know you care about them, I spend an hour with my new patients. I spend a half an hour follow-up. If you connect with them, it doesn't matter. They know you can make mistakes. But if they know it's out of love that you're sharing these ideas, and they see results most of the time with what we do. I can have patients come in, as I mentioned, with 25 complaints, and the next time they may have just 2 or 3 complaints, right? You can, by connecting the dots, showing how all of those connect to these fundamental aspects. And once doctors realize that, they won't burn out anymore, right? They're burning out because they're practicing a style of medicine that's profit-oriented, tied in with pharmaceuticals and the hospital industry and et cetera.
Excellent advice. And what you're sharing applies not only to healthcare professionals, but like you said, to really anybody, to essentially follow your bliss.
Absolutely.
Jim, is there anything else you want to share today about your journey expanding as a physician in holistic health and embracing spirituality?
It's such an exciting pathway. Once you get on your pathway and go down, and part of what I'm doing currently that maybe a year ago I wasn't as focused on is that every opportunity that comes up, I don't postpone it for a day or a week or a month. I jump on each opportunity. So, there may be emails that I might not be anxious about responding to right away, but I'm better about responding to each email right now because everything we do makes the world a better place. Now, from a Christian perspective, I had a patient come up to me after one of these Sunday sessions and say, when I was looking at Paul in the New Testament, I couldn't understand what he meant by joy because the Jewish were who Paul was preaching to, and the Jewish had this tradition, at least at this time, and Hebrew is very difficult to decipher in terms of what joy truly meant. So when she researched that, she found that joy to these Jewish people that Paul was speaking to meant two things. One, it was living in the moment, not living in the future, living in the past. And number two, it was 100 blessings. At the end of the day, count 100 blessings. And I thought, well, I don't think I have 100 blessings that I could count. But the key was the definition of blessing. What the Jewish were counting as blessings was each not only positive thing, but every quote unquote negative thing or every challenge they had. Every interaction was a blessing. And if you count all your interactions every day, and if you're out and about, which you don't want to be at home as a hermit, you need to interact, then yes, you can experience 100 blessings. So everything is a lesson, and that's a blessing because you're wiser. And again, when you reach 72, and hopefully you can get there a lot sooner than I did, but it's such an invigorating place to be in my life. And yeah, not every moment is perfect, but it's getting closer and closer to that. And I'm just so excited with my life at this stage. And you can be too. If you read and study and follow these ideas, you'll be amazed how your life can improve.
Dr. Jim Roach, thank you so much for all that you've shared with us today and for providing this beautiful inspiration. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Amy, it's such a blessing. You're such a blessing to so many yourself. So thank you.
And I look forward to having more conversations with you as well.
Oh, I would love it.
And for those of you listening or watching, thank you for being with us. You are the reason that we are here.
I imagine that by now many of you already realize that, in conjunction with Qu'o Books, we've just launched the new Thinking Aloud Dialogues book imprint, and our first title is There Life After Death?